Well, good morning. Good to see everyone. For our friends and family out in Gallup, thanks for joining us today as well. So, a study was done about 15 years ago. I would venture to say that study is incorrect if you kind of look at digital technologies and how they have developed. But the suggestion is that in a person's lifetime, they will spend 90,000 hours at work. 90,000 hours. Put that into perspective. Of your lifetime, you will spend 10 years at the office or work. And so based on that, I'm going to throw something out that you have primary mission fields. We can talk about your family, talk about our neighborhoods that we live in, and we can talk about our workplaces. And so our workplace becomes a huge area of influence into people's lives. And so that's no small thing. Now, with that, here is the challenge. I've been in ministry for 3 decades. And in those 3 decades, I have noticed, as I've walked alongside people, that there are primary stressors or primary areas where people are saying, I'm not getting it right, or there is too much stress in this particular area. So home is one of them, but I will even say, I believe that most people find greater stress at work than they do at home. Even when things are kind of rocky at home, sometimes it can be worse at work. In fact, one of the things that oftentimes happens is people are unsettled in their job. They're just trying to find meaning and like, what am I here for? Sometimes people are dealing with really difficult people. People that you did not choose to include into your life, right? But they're there, and you have to deal with them. And there's that feeling of life is kind of going nowhere. And I may be getting paid well, but this just doesn't feel like it has the purpose and value that I think it should have. Now, you might be there, you might have been there, you might actually be there one day, and I want to let you know that you are not alone. You are not alone. In fact, I can just tell you, there's doesn't come to church anymore, but there was one guy, I could count on it like clockwork, almost every 3 months. He was emailing saying, hey, can I get together with you? And we would spend hours talking about challenges at work. And maybe you've got one of those jobs that has a lot of challenges, but I want to let you know that there is a guy in the Bible. There's a lot of guys in the Bible, but there is one particular guy in the Bible that when we would look at worldly success, he had more worldly success than any other person that we read of in the Bible. When you talk about wealth, he had more wealth than any other person in the Bible. He had wisdom, he had smarts, he would have what we would call it. He had it all. However, he was unsettled. In fact, I would even go as far as to say he was beyond unsettled. He was dealing with an existential crisis like, I can't make meaning of life. I can't put this all together. And in the middle of his big existential crisis, there is an existential crisis that has to do with work and the meaning of work and the value of work and the purpose of work and all of this, trying to figure out, does it make sense at all? So what we're going to do here today is we're going to take a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 2. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon is dealing with, let's call it, an existential work crisis. Trying to figure out how to kind of manage this, but yet it becomes bigger than even work. So we're going to do something a bit different today. I think sometimes we can kind of land in a couple of verses, but we're going to go through 26 verses today. And because I want us to see the big picture, and I want us to see the challenge that kind of comes, that he is dealing with. And we're going to get real about a lot of the stuff that goes on in life and even beyond the workplace. And so verses 1 through 3. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Now, don't want to kind of like gloss over this, but basically what Solomon is saying is, you know what? I'm at the end of my life, and looking back at my life, it was all like college. I had a lot of fun. And I took hold of pleasure, and I took hold of wine, and I took hold of a little bit of the debauchery that comes with just this existence in life. And at the end, after experiencing all of this, I was empty inside. I realized that it really didn't have any lasting value. And so he's struggling with that. Now, again, this isn't work, but he's looking at life in general. But now we're going to get into the work environment. Notice verses 4 through 6. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. And I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. If you go down again to verses 8 and 9, he says, I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the children of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. So Solomon is looking at his life. He's like, listen, I built things. I planted things. I made Jerusalem greater than it was before me. So he's like, I'm better than my dad, and his dad was David. Okay? And so he's like, I was successful. I was significant. I was powerful. And he's going through all the list of all of his accomplishments and everything that he had done in his lifetime. And he was like, you know, really? Boom, look at me. Look what I have accomplished in life. And so reading on in verses 10 and 11, we find a little bit more. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. So we're getting into deep work sort of stuff. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil, and how I had expanded in doing it, and behold, all this was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. And so he begins with this idea of, listen, I did a lot of good stuff, and I built a lot of things, and I employed a lot of people. In fact, they would say he was Israel's largest employer, right? And again, he was able to jockey for position. Many of the concubines and many of the wives that he had were about expanding the reach and the influence of Israel. So he did fun stuff. He was successful and he was building things. But in the end, he still felt empty. He still felt like that was it. That's all that there is. Why? What else is there? And maybe you have been there. Have you ever been there at work? Like you've said, if I just get the next raise, then. Or if I just get the next promotion, then. or if I could, just feel like I had this level of appreciation at work. How many of you ever feel like your boss does not appreciate you? So guys say here all the time. Y'all, that's a time-sensitive joke. It has a little bit of delay to it. So, but have you ever reached the point where you thought, if I just get this, if I just get this, if I just get this, and maybe it's like, if I can just graduate high school, if I can just, and when if came, you just kind of felt like that was it. I thought I would hear, like birds singing, and the sun would be shining, and all would be right with the world, but yet there's something empty about this all. And so Solomon, looking at all he had accomplished in life, when he had looked back on his life, and he's probably in the twilight years of his life, he's looking back and he's like, wow, that was big, but there's nothing there. I don't feel like I've accomplished anything. And so he begins to have this inner dialogue within himself, and we get to verse 12. And in verse 12 he says, "So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can a man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done." And so Solomon is kind of like he's examining patterns of life. And so he says, I've considered patterns of life. I considered, wisdom, and I considered madness, and I considered foolishness. I've kind of looked at all the different ways that people can live. And so he's really kind of searching of what is the right path? What is the better path? What is the thing that's going to give us meaning and value? But notice verse 13. In verse 13 he says, "Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than folly, and there is more gain in light than in darkness." So he goes through and he kind of makes I'm going to call this a mini conclusion. It's better to be wise than foolish. Right? Have you ever looked at somebody and they're living a foolish life and they keep making mistakes again and again and again, and it comes back to roost and you go, "Told you so." If you're a parent, have you ever looked at your child and you've watched them make mistakes and you go, "You know what? That one's on you. That was stupid." And the Bible says it's better to live wise than foolish. And so he's looking at that and looking at how that comes across to work. But then again, we find that while he concluded that wisdom is better than foolishness, there is also this reality. Let's skip on down to verse 15. He says, "Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For the wise and the foolish there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool." So he considers the fate of the wise man and the foolish man. And you know what he concludes? Both of us die. Both of us die. And there is no lasting remembrance. Now, I did something when I was a youth pastor. We used to have this thing, and we had a youth group of about 20 kids or so in Abilene, Texas. And so during Wednesday nights during the summer, we called this Destination Unknown. And the tagline is, "We can tell you where we're going, but we would have to kill you." And there were some youth kids that would have been a welcome reward. But the reality is every Wednesday night, we went to a different destination. And we would make a lesson out of it. And this was, you got to think, this is way, 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 way back in the day. We took a youth group of 20 kids into a baby nursery in a hospital, like in the actual nursery, and we talked to labor and delivery nurses and so on like that. We would not be able to do that today by any stretch of the imagination. My mom worked at a hospital, and I said, "Hey, would you be able to get us into the morgue at the hospital? And so we went to the morgue and we talked about death. I got complaints about that one. But so if you're a youth minister, don't take kids to the morgue. That's probably a wise thing. But one of the things is we went out and we found an old cemetery, and it was south and west of Abilene where we were in. And like when we talk about an old cemetery, there are people there or there are bodies there and graves there, and people had died in the 1800s. And so we took big pieces of paper out and we had kids etch headstones. And to think about that these people died in the 1800s, and by 1990-ish, there was no recollection of any of those people there. Now, we think that we want to make our mark in the world, but let's just be honest. Unless we are one of those historical figures that we get our names in history books, 100 years from now, have you ever been there? Have you ever been there like you've been going through the family pictures? The last time I was home, back seeing my parents, we were going through like old family pictures of, from like the 1930s and so on. And they, on the back it would say, Uncle such and such and Uncle such and such. And then there's a question mark because nobody knows who this one is right here. That's going to be all of us at some point in time. That there is no lasting memory because we died and we lived here and we were wise or foolish, but we die. Hey, thanks for that, Brandon, right? But notice verse 17. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after the wind. Solomon's looking at his life's work, and he said, I hated life because there's no lasting impression that's going to be left. And really kind of, you think about, why would Solomon hate his life? Guy had everything. I mean, more than any other person would ever have. And if we were to say, this guy had it, he had it. He had everything that everybody in the world says, well, if you get that, you will be happy. And Solomon said, I had that, and I hated life. And here is his thought pattern, and this is super depressing. Pleasures don't please. Work is an exercise in futility. Wisdom doesn't satisfy, and you die. That's Solomon looking at life, saying, man, kind of like, I always think about Nacho Libre, okay, sorry, where he goes, it sucks to be me. And that's basically what he's saying here is life stinks. I mean, you do all this stuff, then you die. I mean, that's it. That's life. And then he goes back to his internal dialogue, and it doesn't get any better. Notice verse 18. He says, I hated all my toil, in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. So let's be honest that Solomon, he was in the place that he was in because he came after his father David, and he basically inherited it, and he made it bigger and better and more prominent and more expansive. But he says, I hated all my toil because guess what? I'm going to work all my life and I'm going to leave it to someone else. And I'm going to leave it to someone else, and I'm going to leave it to my kids who may not appreciate it, and they may fart it away. That's really kind of what he's saying. And then you get into verse 19, and he says, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet be the master of all which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This is vanity. So even more, it is painful to think that I'm going to leave all of my hard work to a fool who is going to undo it all. Ever been there? I served in a church one time that less than a year after I left, it split. And I thought, I just invested so much of my life into that. And it took like that amount of time for it to be undone. And Solomon's kind of looking at it like, I've done all this work, and some bozo is going to come behind me and undo it all. In fact, let's go ahead and look at verses 20 through 23. So I turned about to give my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is also vanity and great evil. And how many people work to build an estate and they retire and die and somebody else gets it? So basically what he's saying, what has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. So Solomon is moved to despair, thinking that all his life he would work, and he would endure sorrow and grief over work. He would lose sleep over decisions. He would become successful, and someone would come after him and undo it all. You know what happened in Solomon's life after he died? He had a son named Rehoboam who took over the kingdom, and Rehoboam, in about a nanosecond, destroyed it all. In fact, in very short order, the 12 tribes of Israel became 10 and 2. Because Rehoboam was a tyrant, and he was an unkind man, and most of the nation of Israel said, you know what, you're going to be like that? We're out. So Solomon, what almost self-fulfilling prophecy right here, was saying, my idiot son is going to destroy it all. Now, fortunately, there's a verse 24 through 26. And when I think about this, it's almost like Solomon reaches a point to say, yep, life stinks, but it doesn't have to be that way. Work can be an exercise in futility. Work can be a disappointing sort of thing, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's another path that will lead to fulfillment and joy. There is another path that will bring purpose. There is another path. So let's look at that here real quick this morning. It says, there is nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given him wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give it the one who pleases God. This is also vanity in striving after the wind. So we're going to come back to these verses here in just a few moments, but I want to hold on to this thought for a moment, and I want to go back to the first 23 verses. First 23 verses. Solomon is going through this experiment of looking at life. And my math, I hope I read and counted correctly, but I'm not 100% sure. And if I missed one or two along the way, I still think that the point is exactly the same. But I noticed something as I was reading through the first 23 verses. The number of times Solomon said, I. So I went through this, and I think the personal pronoun I is used 30 times in 23 verses. Where Solomon's saying, I. So when you add me and my and myself, that's another 24 times in 23 verses. So 54 times and in 23 verses, Solomon's talking about himself. And I think there's something to be seen here. Solomon is examining life when life was self-absorbed, when it was self-centered. And so he is looking at work. We're talking about work here. He is examining what work is like when it is self-absorbed and it's self-centered and it's all about self. And here's his conclusion. A self-centered life and work apart from God is a hopeless end. I'll just say it like this. It's a road to nowhere. It's a bridge. I mean, we've heard that term politically, a bridge to nowhere. It's a ship sailing in the ocean that never reaches port. There is no there. When you have a work that excludes Jesus, it just simply does not satisfy. But go back to verses 24 and 25. There is nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or drink or have enjoyment? Did you notice this? He says, I saw this as from the hand of God. God desires that there is fulfillment and joy and pleasure and purpose in our work. In fact, I'm just going to say Solomon figured this out. True enjoyment and fulfillment are impossible without God. You're not truly going to have that, like at the end of the day, you get home and you can have some supper and just kind of unwind for the evening. You're not going to have that what a good day, apart from God. It's really what it comes down to. And so we're talking about work and job and career here today. And if you are unfulfilled and unsettled in your work, I'm going to say some hard truths here today. May or may not be the case. But if you have a horrible job, it might not be your job. If you have a horrible boss, and listen, as a boss, I can tell you bosses are imperfect. When my kids come and they talk to me about their bosses, I can speak from a boss and say, you know, sometimes bosses have a lot on their plate and they make mistakes too. But if you have a horrible boss, it might not be your boss. You know what it might be? It might be that you've not allowed Jesus to be involved in your workplace. It might be that you've not looked at life and looked at career and said, I'm not working for, I'm working with and for Jesus. That might be the issue right there. And I know, and I can even say, work in ministry of all places. It's supposed to be all about Jesus. But we can get so caught up in work and responsibilities and deadlines, making money, making sure that this quarter is better than last quarter, all those different things. We get so busy doing all of that that we don't even realize that we left Jesus in the car. We don't even realize that we left Jesus, Jesus, you hang out here in the smoking section, right? And if I need you, I will bring you in. And that's how we have kind of gone about life. So basically, Solomon concluded that a self-centered, life and work is a hopeless end. But simultaneously, he kind of reaches this point to say a Jesus-centered life and work is an endless hope. That when you put Jesus into the equation, the possibilities are endless. And truly, the possibilities are endless because you never know the influence that you might have when you are truly allowing Jesus to influence your work. You will never know the impact that you might have when the Spirit of Jesus living inside of you gets to dictate how you do work. In fact, I'm going to say it like this. This is our bottom line. In order for work to work, faith has to go to work. In order for work to work, faith has to go to work. When it comes to work, faith is not something we get to check at the door. Faith is not something we get to leave in the car. It's not something we get to leave at home. It's not something that we get to, I'm going to say this, compartmentalize for Sunday mornings. Let me tell you about Ben Shelley. I love this man. He was a member of our first church, retired, and he had been in sales all his life. In fact, I'll tell you, our oldest son, Ben was a salesman, and he sold like shampoos and different things like that. Part of what he sold was diapers, and so he went into grocery stores and stuff like that. We did not buy a single diaper for the first 18 months of our son's life because Ben provided us with diapers. So cool. So cool. That was a raise in and of itself. You understand that? So I called Ben on the phone, and he would go, Ben Shelley. So he's such a distinguished man. But Ben had left the church for many years. Now, we were in Abilene, Texas. You know anything about Abilene, Texas? 3 colleges in town. Church of Christ College, Baptist College, Methodist College. It's like the churchiest town in the United States of America. And Ben said, I left the church for so many years because I worked with all these people in all facets of business. And here's what I discovered. These men who were pillars in their church communities, it was church on Sunday, business as usual Monday through Friday. Basically, what Ben was saying is people had fallen into the trap of compartmentalizing their faith to where it was Jesus on Sundays. But it was cutthroat and lack of ethics and lack of morals Monday through Saturday. Because, in many ways, they didn't take Jesus to work. And work will only work when we take Jesus to work. So, as we challenge our head, heart, and hands here today, I want to throw this out. I want to say do the math. Now, I will tell you one of the glorious things about being a ministry student, has a degree in the Bible, it was like one math class because that's what the government said. So I stink at math, but I do know that in math, anything in the parentheses, right, gets done first. Okay? So I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in the parentheses, and then we're going to talk about the multiplier here in a moment. So let's talk about 80 plus years of life because you're healthy and life was good. And I'm going to talk about 40 plus years of work. And I'm going to say 40 years of work because you had a good job and you could retire early. You had 8 promotions, 10 commendations for excellent work. You had a fat 401k. And a retirement party at the end. And when I'm talking retirement party, I'm not talking Subway with a cheesy cake at the office before you leave on your last day of work. I'm talking like, you go out to a place with the prime rib and like, the shrimp cocktail and all of that kind of stuff, and they give you a plaque and say, thank you for all your years of service. And when you look at that, all this stuff in parentheses, we would say, wow, that was great. That's a great life. I mean, I can travel, I can do all the stuff that I want to do. Life is good. But if the multiplier at the end is not a Jesus-centered work approach, that's going to be 0. And anything multiplied by 0 is what? So let's look at a different picture. Let's look at 70 years of life because life is tough. Let's look at 50 years of work, 55 years of work because you had to grind it out. Let's look at the fact that you just kind of worked that job all your life, and maybe a couple of times boss came in and boss said, good job. At the end, you had a little bit of Social Security, you had a little bit of retirement. And at the end of the last day, you got the Subway, you got the long Subway sandwich, right? And you got the cake from Walmart that says, we will miss you, and so on. But person after person after person came up, hugging, crying, pained, imagining what the workplace is going to be without you, because the multiplier was Jesus at the center of your work. In the end, only one of them has value and purpose. In the end, there's one that's 0, and when Jesus is the multiplier, we can't even put a number on it. And so with that, do the math. And understand that God has you in your workplace, and it may have nothing to do with you. But also here, ask Jesus to change your heart for your workplace. It might be that people are jerks. But maybe if you ask Jesus to change your heart for that jerk, your heart will actually change. And finally this. I've told this to people time and time and time again. Paul talks about this in Ephesians, talks about this in Colossians. You're not working for your boss, but work as to the Lord. Knowing that you will have to give an account. They won't have to give an account. You don't worry about them. But Jesus will one day say, you know what? Well done. Good and faithful servant. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you. Thank you for, Lord, I thank you that you've given us places that are imperfect so that we might have a light that shines very bright. So in our workplaces, even if we're the only light that is shining, let it shine bright. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.